Yes, I believe that's in the transcript as well. I mean, he basically has said that he was conducting a kind of investigation of his own into what happened there.
Okay. Hopefully that puts that to bed, and I yield back to Mr. Hastings.
Yes, I yield to, I certainly yield.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It doesn't put it, I appreciate the gentlelady bringing it up, but it had nothing to do with the questions that was asked. And it doesn't put it to bed at all. I've always acknowledged that they were properly done subpoenas. I'm still an institutionalist. I believe the subpoena power of the committees act work. And I've never denied that the committees did. In fact, I said it in the Judiciary Committee that day to Mr. Coleman. Never questioned the committee process, never questioned the subpoena, and also acknowledged there was never a direct subpoena on any members of Congress. What I did say, and what I'll continue to say was, even in the gentlelady just acknowledged it, was that when they started going through the phone records, they looked at the people they called, and then someone somehow had the ranking member's phone number. And they collaborated that with that phone call that was working. Now, even to that point, I could say, okay. But my problem comes is the way it was actually put in is what I would consider a political job in the report itself, when it could have been done many different ways, because it was not applicable notice to this article of impeachment. It was not anything that was furthering a narrative except to, frankly, look at getting back at the ranking member and others. They could have put that in as we've seen in other reports, Congress member 1, Congress member 2. So nothing that was supposed that was said, that I appreciate the gentlelady bringing this up, but I never questioned the subpoenas, never questioned that. My question was who is actually was said to actually start putting these together and then put them in the report.
If I could just say, I just bristle a little bit at the suggestion that Chairman Schiff and the Intelligence Committee did anything wrong there. I was a state assistant attorney general a couple of years, and my recollection is that if you get a table of telephone records and other numbers come up, you do your due diligence on all of the other numbers to see who's involved. I mean, what we're talking about is possibly conspiratorial activity. And so that was the way in which those numbers surfaced, and I think they did their regular due diligence on it, and that's how those callers were identified.
Could I ask my friend to yield just a moment?
I have the time, and I'll yield to Ms. Woodall.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hastings. I appreciate that. I did not know that I understood what you just said. I thought you said your experience in the state prosecutor's office led you to release the kinds of names of co-conspirators as those things were discovered. Certainly, you are not suggesting that Mr. Nunes was a co-conspirator in any way, shape, or form.
No, not at all. No, not at all.
Thank you. I thank my friend for
right. You finished, Ms. Scallon? All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, when we took our recess to vote, you had just made what I consider to be a very profound statement that's short. And it is that the president's actions, in your words, were so wrong. And it's hard for me to believe that all of us here and in the previous committee, and as this matter proceeds, do not all understand that. But the die is pretty much cast. In this institution, we are fond of saying, after everybody is exhausted and talking about whatever the issue is, that everybody has said everything that needs to be said, but I haven't said it yet. And that's what's going to happen with every one of the members that come after me. But what is disturbing to me is that we're like we're in alternative universes, not just here in the Rules Committee, but in the Judiciary Committee, in the Intelligence Committee, where I served for 8 years, and really in America. And it's regrettable that my friends, the Republicans, are not addressing or defending the president's actions. What you're doing is talking about the process. I might add footnote right there. You haven't seen nothing yet if you listen to Lindsey Graham and the majority leader, McConnell, about how if and when this matter gets to them, how they're going to act. How dare somebody say that they aren't going to pretend that they're fair, and the other one is going to collaborate with the White House. So if I would assume that the managers that are Democrats, when they get over there, are going to be talking about process, because if you're talking about unfairness, just the mere fact that both of those people who should recuse themselves, in my judgment, made those kinds of statements indicates where they are. But to turn back to you, Mr. Chairman, about something being wrong with what the president did. When I was a boy, and that's 83 years ago, my dad, who never went to school a day in his life, when I had crucial issues over the course of our time, both as a child, little boy, and he lived long enough to see me become a lawyer, and the difficulties along the way in college and what have you. He would always say to me that right don't wrong nobody. And the fact of the matter is that what we're doing here is right. Let me just excise one thing. So-called corruption, and Mr. Chairman, with your permission, just to make sure that this record is complete, not that this transcript has not been released, but I ask unanimous consent that the unclassified version of the telephone conversation of the president with President Zelensky of Ukraine be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
I'm going to come back to that. We find ourselves here today discussing 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald John Trump because of his disregard of and disrespect for the United States Constitution. President Trump withheld American taxpayer money that was appropriated by their duly elected members of Congress, all of us, to help our ally fight a hot war. It would be one thing if we, as we do help around the world, if this was not an enemy of the United States, a corrupt enemy of the United States, Russia. I don't have to ask anybody about it. I've been there. I saw the changes that took place. I monitored elections there. So I know that corruption is rife in that country. And yet we witnessed last week Sergei Lavrov, who I know, coming here in the Oval Office with the president smiling. And you all aren't prepared to defend that kind of action with reference to corruption. I find it strange that you're in that position. But Trump withheld this taxpayer money to help our ally fight a hot war against Russia. So he, President Trump, could obtain a personal political benefit. And I'm going to get back to this document I asked you to see on at some point. Talk about that. And just in case folks think that the facts, which my colleagues will not discuss, are a bit too tenuous, a bit too hazy, please remember that on October 3rd, 2019, President Trump went out on the White House lawn, stood in front of a bunch of reporters and television cameras, and advised President Zelensky to announce the investigation. For good measure, he then encouraged China to also start an investigation into the Biden family. Not long afterwards, on October 17, 2019, President Trump allowed his chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to hold a press conference in which Mr. Mulvaney not only admitted that a quid pro quo existed, but that we should get over it, because that is just the way things are, he said, when it comes to foreign affairs, and apparently foreign countries being lobbied to meddle in our elections. Mick is dead wrong. That is not how we exercise our policy in this country. I'm no world expert, but I began my career here 27 years ago on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was appointed by Newt Gingrich, along with Doug B. Ryder, to study the reversion of Hong Kong to and Macau to mainland China. I went with Donald Payne often to 26 countries in Africa. And over the course of time, I became the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And if you can say that, you ought to be the president of that organization. But there are 57 countries in that organization, including Russia, and Canada and the United States make it a transatlantic organization. I went to Europe 36 times during a 2-year period to most of those countries. I made it to 47 of those 57 countries, and I swore in Montenegro as the 57th country in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I think I know a little bit more about the world than Mick Mulvaney, and that is not the way President Bush, President Clinton, President Obama, that is not the way they conducted policy at all. Well, he says get over it. I, for one, will not accept that vision of this great country, let alone get over it. Mr. Chairman, also consider an article of obstruction of Congress today we are, and I believe the record shows the administration's obstruction ought to be beyond debate. And you have demonstrably shown lots of that obstruction. And while many of our members don't want to bring it up, I cannot, when I was ill at home for a protracted period of time, I read every line of the Mueller report. And the Mueller report clearly reflects that the president obstructed justice long before we get to this particular matter that we are dealing with. We are stewards of the House of Representatives, and to not have all members of this body object in the most strenuous terms to this administration's complete obstruction of our clear constitutional prerogative to conduct an impeachment inquiry is, to me, truly disappointing. To not object, to not draw the line here, is to do a great disservice not only to those who came before us, but those who will come after us. With that, Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions for Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin, did President Trump solicit Ukraine's interference in our country's 2020 election?
It is overwhelmingly clear that he did.
Did President Trump solicit this foreign interference in order to obtain a personal political benefit?
He absolutely did.
Did President Trump condition the release of taxpayer money appropriated by Congress on President Zelensky announcing an investigation into President Trump's political opponent?
All of the evidence we have says that he did.
Did President Trump's actions undermine the national security of the United States and that of a key ally, namely Ukraine?
I believe that they did. Ukraine had been invaded and attacked by Russia. There had been more than 13,000 casualties in that war. The president was desperate. The president of Ukraine was desperate to get security assistance, and that was provided by Congress. Congress decided that this money was a good investment to defend a besieged ally, that we needed to contain the continuing imperial designs of Vladimir Putin to expand Russian power and to control nations in the neighborhood there.
On January 20th, 2017, Donald John Trump to an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Has, in your opinion, the President violated that oath?
I think this was an essential betrayal of his oath of office when he decided to try and coerce a foreign government to get involved in our presidential election, this presidential election, in order to steer the result in a particular direction, and then, as the pattern shows, to cover it all up by stonewalling Congress and by issuing an unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate ban on participation in a congressional impeachment investigation. You know, we got a letter from Mr. Spallone where he didn't even bother to invoke a privilege. Didn't even bother to invoke the phony absolute immunity pretext they've been using. He just said, no, we're not going to participate. They really think that unlike every other American citizen, they are not subject to congressional subpoena. And like you, Mr. Hastings, I would wish that even if our colleagues across the aisle differ with us on Article 1, they have some difference which has yet to be expressed, certainly under oath by anyone. But if they believe there's a different story or the president has an alibi, okay, fine. But in terms of Article 2, the president cannot have the power to destroy our oversight, investigative power, if we're going to be able to impeach a corrupt president.
And that's the next question I wanted to ask you. Does the United States Constitution place the power of impeachment solely in the Congress?
Solely in the House of Representatives.
In the House of Representatives.
And the reason why it's stated that way, Mr. Hastings, is because the framers didn't want the Senate thinking that they could initiate an impeachment. They can't. It's got to come from the House of Representatives, and because they wanted to demarcate it from the discussion which was taking place at the time, which is that, well, the Supreme Court should impeach, or the state legislature should impeach. There were lots of ideas out there. But look, they said that the House of Representatives was the organ that represents the people. We are the people's body. Now, the Senate has some claim after the enactment of the 17th Amendment. They're elected by the people now, too. They used to be chosen by the state legislatures, but they really still do represent on the kind of disproportionate basis of each state getting two, despite the size of the state. But we are as close as you get in our Constitution to the pure representatives of the people.
And the Senate acts on oath and affirmation as well, am I correct?
They are the constitutional jurors. In some sense, the judges too. They will decide on matters of law, but they will make the final application of the law to the facts of this case. And that's why I think you're correct to point out that all of them have to think very carefully about what the constitutional oath of a juror entails. And certainly some of them have been saying things that seem to be apart from what we would expect of jurors in any other context.
It's my understanding that, and the chairman, McGovern, has pointed out some of this, but I want to highlight the number. It's my understanding that the executive branch has received over 70 specific individualized requests for documents during Congress's impeachment inquiry. How many documents have been produced?
0 have been produced. We have not gotten anything. We've not gotten anything from the Office of Management and Budget. We've not gotten anything from the Department of State. I mean, we have witnesses who complained to us in this process that their own documents had essentially been embargoed and controlled by the president and by the executive branch when they wanted to turn it over so we could find out what was going on. We're in a search for the truth here. This is not a game. We want to know what happened.
I hear you. In response to duly authorized subpoenas, how many top aides has President Trump made available to the committees conducting the impeachment inquiry?
Well, he's tried to block all of the witnesses. We ended up having 17 witnesses, but there's still a number of key fact witnesses who have not come forward because the president has succeeded in blocking and restraining their testimony, like the Secretary of Energy, like the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and so on.
My recollection during the judiciary proceedings is that you put this question in a different form that I'm about to put to my colleagues now, and that's all of us in this room. I asked the question, how many of my friends here on this dais think it is okay for an American president to solicit foreign interference in our elections? Raise your hands if you think that that's okay. Anybody? I see none. And in that light, clearly, we have these differences. Mr. Collins? Would you consider Ukraine a strategic partner to the United States?
Yes.
Do you want us to believe that withholding the aid for the reasons our investigation identifies did not harm United States national security?
Which ones are you talking about on that fact matter, Mr. Hastings?
I'm
The
talking
ones that the majority stipulate to, or the ones the minorities stipulate to?
the majority.
No, I do not agree with the majority's interpretation of the law.
I seem to think that that's going to be your role. You don't think that asking a president of a foreign country that is in a hot war, that we withhold aid from him, you don't think that affects our national security if you think Ukraine is our ally, as I believe you do and I do?
Yeah, Mr. Case, I just don't accept the premise of your
All
facts.
right. What value for Ukraine do you see in the Oval Office visit that was being sought?
You'd have to ask the Ukraine.
Do you recognize that such a visit would send a strong message to Russia, sort of like Lavrov's being in the Oval Office last week, and the rest of the world, that the United States supported Ukraine and was ready to defend it against Russian aggression?
I think a better statement was when Mr. Trump sent actually offensive weapons to shoot down Russian assets.
And that ignores the fact that the aid was withheld and a hot war was ongoing?
Again, we're going, in all due respect, we're going in circles here. I do not believe there's anything wrong with the aid being held for the reasons it said, and I've stated this before. And actually, Mr. Trump did more for the Ukrainians in a hot war than was previously done. So I think we're—
You know, I've heard that before, and I'm not going to elaborate, but I can assure you, if they point, as you do, and many do, to President Obama not providing lethal weapons, what the minority fails to note is during the early stages of the Trump administration, the aforementioned lethal weapons were provided to Ukraine. And it wasn't until 2019, during the lead up to the 2020 presidential election and after former Vice President Biden announced his candidacy, did President Trump exert his official duties and place a hold on lethal aid. Let me turn to corruption. Ostensibly, this July 25th transcript reflects, according to my friends on the other side, both in judiciary and to the extent that the report from intelligence reflects it, that in this particular matter, that corruption was what was being sought to be determined. Let me urge President Trump to look around the world if he wants to talk about corruption, and have him answer for me why he cozies up to Russia and all roads lead to Russia when we all know how corrupt they are and what they have done, not only in the previous election, but what they are doing even as we are in the run-up to this election. And yes, my county, my state, had two counties that hackers from Russia were successful. And he has the audacity to go out and say now they don't talk about Russia in the elections, they're talking about Ukraine. Why is it that the president, as the chairman has pointed out, closes up to a dictator like Duterte in the Philippines? Why is he not looking right here in this hemisphere where we have not paid as much attention as we should? And I believe my colleague is going to address it, but I do need to raise Venezuela, and I haven't heard very much lately from him with reference to Venezuela. I haven't heard very much from him about El Salvador. Haven't heard, other than China dealing with trade, anybody in here that doesn't believe China is corrupt, then you should just visit any one of the places where people are in gulags and being held, and how intellectuals and religious leaders are being tortured in that country. And not to mention, the chairman pointed to it as what the president said, that he fell in love with Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un is preparing missiles, and if successful, may one day be able to reach this country, and there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't. Is the president aware of what's going on in Italy? Is he aware of what's going on in India? How about Iran? I haven't heard him say a mumbling word about what's happening in Iran. Is he aware of what's going on in Lebanon? Is he aware of the corruption that's being identified, and how Chile is on the bubble? I just can't believe you people. And let me turn now to this and ask you all, and I already know the answer. Can anybody in here, particularly those of us on the Rules Committee, name any other president in the history of the United States that has asked a foreign government or its leaders to investigate an American citizen for political purposes? Can anybody in here identify any president that has done that? Seeing none, I'll proceed. The simple fact of the matter is that my colleagues have determined that they're going to go down the road of distraction, and are not going to discuss the facts in this matter. Let me tell you some of the people that you all should have heard from, and some would argue that we should wait until the courts, and I'm sure that the administration would fight all the way to keep Secretary Pompeo from testifying, John Bolton from testifying, Mick Mulvaney, Dan McGahn, Don McGahn, the man that the president told to go and fire the FBI director. How about Robert Blair and Michael Duffy, the guys from Mick Mulvaney's shop where the aid has been withheld? Now let me turn to this document. First off, let me ask both of you whether you know if a full verbatim transcript exists of this July 25th call. Ms. Collins, do you know?
I know that all the witnesses testified this was a clear and accurate transcript.
Mr. Raskin, do you know whether a verbatim transcript exists?
The July 25 call?
Yes.
Well, that is not a verbatim transcript.
Correct.
That we have. That's a contemporaneous memorandum that was written by the White House. I've never seen a verbatim transcript.
There's no witness testified. There's no witness to contradict the statement in that, and any of the witnesses did.
Excuse me?
They did not. They said that the transcript was accurate.
Well, what about all of those people that testified before your committee that discussed matters that they thought were wrong that the president did?
Wow, Mr. Hastings, I wish we'd have had all those people testify before my committee, but they didn't.
Okay. Let me turn to the footnote on this unclassified document that's in the record. It says a memorandum of a telephone conversation is not a verbatim transcript of a discussion. The text in this document records the notes and recollections of Situation Room duty officers and NSC policy staff assigned to listen and memorialize the conversation in written form as the conversation takes place. A number of factors can affect the accuracy of the record, including poor telecommunications connections and variations in accent and/or interpretation. The word, quote, inaudible, unquote, is used to indicate, it says, indicate portions of a conversation that a note taker was unable to hear. Do either of you know why the full transcript is in a classified server that can be accessed only by the highest of authorities insofar as classification of their ability? Do any of you know why this thing is in a server? This classified server?
No, I cannot give you the full explanation of that.
Mr. Collins?
Mr. Morrison testified it was put there in administrative error. Mr. Morrison testified to that.
Administrative error.
That's his testimony, his words, not mine.
Who is Mr. Morris?
The gentleman who testified at committee, Mr. Tim, works at NSS. No, SC, I'm sorry.
Is he the person that put it in the server?
He's the one that testified to it. You'd have to ask him. Again, I would love to do all this. We would have loved to have had these witnesses actually in
Would
judicial.
you love to have the server?
I'd love to have witnesses.
We got people running around Ukraine looking for a server under some CrowdStrike notion.
Yeah, we also have 68% of the people bribing their public officials too, and that's a Ukrainian issue as well. But on this one,
There are a whole lot of
there's no
issues.
credible witness who said there was anything in the transcript that was not there.
I find
None of your
it,
witnesses.
I find it that the president goes out, issues this unclassified statement, and there's a statement out there somewhere in a classified server that may have gotten there mistakenly, according to Ms. Morrison, as you're testifying. But my question ultimately would be, why is it there? Why hasn't it been retrieved? And why have you all not received it? But I digress. Let me go on and finish up with this
Ms. Hastings,
unclassified
can I
statement.
ask just a question? There's an implication here, and I would just like a clarification. Are you implying there's another transcript out there?
I'm implying that there's more than what we have here.
Okay, which
that's
no
in the
witness,
server.
okay, which no witness testified to. No
Understood.
witness of your witness testified to.
Understood.
And I was
But
just making sure that you didn't believe that there was another transcript out there.
I don't know what's out there. I know
that's
something
about
is
like-
in this server.
Well, that's about like us with the Intelligence Committee's findings as well, that they haven't transferred over to judiciary.
I like to see what's in the server.
I'd love to see what's from the Intelligence Committee that's supposed to be turned over on H-660 as
You
well.
and I
So
could
I
go-
think you and I are in agreement there.
Yeah,
Thank
in
you.
that regard, we are. I would also, let me tell you what even the media in dealing with this statement have not gone into certain of its particulars. Here is what was said by Mr. Zelensky, and I'm truncating this so that I can get off and let other members go about their business. He said, I would also like to thank you for your great support. This is Mr. Zelensky talking to President Trump on July 25th, in the area of defense. We're ready to continue to cooperate for the next steps. Specifically, we're almost ready to buy javelins from the United States for defense purposes. President Trump replies, I'd like you to do us a favor, though. This is from the man talking about buying javelins. He goes immediately to, I'd like for you to do us a favor, though. And a lot of emphasis has not been placed on that language, and I'm not a linguistic person, but the last time I recall somebody asking me to do a favor, though, it was for something that they wanted, and I can't believe that policy is what he was talking about. He goes on to say, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I'd like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I'd like to have the Attorney General, meaning our Attorney General. And my question is, why would you like the Attorney General to call you or your people? And I'd like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance. But they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. My question is, who said that? The only people I know that said that are the Russians. Yes, Mr.
Mr. Hayden, thank you very much for raising this important point. Dr. Fiona Hill, leading Russia expert, who figures importantly in this whole matter, has testified before this committee, and completely uncontradicted and unrefuted, that this CrowdStrike story about Ukraine being the one that attacked our election in 2016 is Russian disinformation. The president there was essentially just repeating Russian disinformation and propaganda, wittingly or unwittingly. It seemed to be innocent enough. He really thought he had something there, but that's what he was repeating. There's nothing behind it. It has been completely debunked and discredited. Mm-hmm. But what makes me suspicious, Mr. Hastings, is that he decided to tie that in with his other plan, which is to get President Zelensky to come and to point the finger at Joe Biden and say, this is the guy we're investigating. And you know, you talk about national security and how national security was compromised. And obviously, America's a country that nations all over the world look to. And we're interested in the security of our land and our people, but also that of our allies and our strategic partners around the world. And we should have some interest in what happens to Ukraine and whether Russia is going to get to trample Ukraine or not. But here's another way national security is implicated. If we say that forever hereafter, we're going to allow the President of the United States to use the awesome powers of his office to shake down particular governments, whether they're tyrants and despots, like Duterte in the Philippines and Orban in Hungary and Putin in Russia and Sisi in Egypt, or they're Democrats, struggling democracies that need our help, like reformer Zelensky in Ukraine. But the president is now allowed to shake them down, to get them involved on a covert basis in our campaign. Guess what? The president might think he's slick by getting away with that, but now there's a foreign government that's got something on us.
Mm-hmm.
They have leverage on us at that point.
It turns out.
Stacy, would you allow me?
Of course.
Thank you. I know you're always great at this. Look, I think the process is wrong. I think we're looking the wrong direction here. And I think it is interesting that we can talk about all the other corruption around the world and the dislike of the way this president has dealt with them. But we also have to remember, even in the transcript that you just read, it is a backwards look, not a forwards look. It is a 2016 look at what happened then. And you rightly read the transcript that he was talking about Robert Mueller, which was coming out of the 2016 election, all the problems that was coming in.
Did you read Mueller's report?
I read every bit of it, sir. That's my committee.
And you disagree with the findings?
I agree with findings. No collusion from Russia, and that he disagreed even with every member of the Judiciary Committee.
And the part that says that there were 10 obstructions of justice by the president, do you agree with that?
No, they're not, because he didn't. Because he did. Because obviously you didn't listen to the Judiciary Committee when several members of the Judiciary Committee outlined in pretty PowerPoints on the screen, here's this, and then we look at him and say, but I disagree with your conclusion. Mm-hmm. I say, so you have to take the whole transcript. And this is what I'm talking about here. When you look at it, he's looking backwards. The Mueller report had just been done. But Ms. Fiona Hill.
I'm going to reclaim my time and look.
Okay, because Fiona Hill is interesting, and I would like, because he brought up Fiona Hill, and I just want to say this one thing. Ukrainians, not Ukraine, but Ukrainians, even Fiona Hill said the Ukrainians bet on the wrong horse, and after being reminded by Ken Vogel that the various Ukrainian officials, Leshchenko, can't pronounce the then powerful Ukrainian parliament, Leshchenko was spent tails in providing false information to Nellie Orr, information that we all know was made its way into the Steele dossier. This was aligning themselves with Clinton.
Mr.
So
Collins,
it was backwards. Look,
Mr.
that's
Collins,
all I'm saying.
were you there when Ms. Hill testified?
Not for Ms. Hill's testimony.
All right, but you have seen.
I'm happy to read the transcript just like you are.
All I can tell you is she dropped a dime on President Trump's actions in Ukraine.
But not enough to find it in the articles of impeachment.
Well, perhaps alone, standing
And,
alone.
and abuse of power is, now again, we've disagreed on, and this is where we can honestly disagree. I disagree that abuse of power is a categorical
All right.
catch-all for this.
I'm going to
This is
reclaim
where-
my time
and I
because
thank you for that. Thank you.
you're going to filibuster.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to reclaim my time from you as well. Both of y'all talk pretty fast. No, I might add, in defense of Ms. Collins for a minute. It's very continuing. What President Trump says is it's very important that you do it if it's possible. Truncating again because it's so much in here, but I'll try to start mid-paragraph with Mr. Zelensky's reply. I'd also like and hope to see him having your trust. He's talking about an ambassador that he's sending to the United States. And your confidence and have personal relations with you so we can cooperate even more so. I'll personally tell you that one of my assistants spoke with Mr. Giuliani just recently. And we are hoping very much that Mr. Giuliani will be able to travel to Ukraine, and we will meet once he comes to Ukraine. My question there is, meet about what when Giuliani comes to Ukraine? And the president just recently said that Giuliani is a good man and a patriot, and he's doing this for love. Last time I bought an airline ticket, I didn't present something that said love. And the question comes, who's paying Giuliani? I have a theory about it, but I won't go into it. He then goes on to say, I just wanted to assure you once again that you have nobody but friends around us. I'll make sure that I surround myself with the best and most experienced people. He goes on at some point, so we can continue our strategic partnership. I also plan to surround myself with great people in addition to that investigation. I guarantee as the president of Ukraine that all the investigations will be done openly and candidly. That I can assure you. Then Trump says, good, because I heard you had a prosecutor, I think he's talking about Poroshenko, who was very good, and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that. The way they shut your very good prosecutor down, and you had some very bad people involved. Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. He was the mayor of New York City, a great mayor, and I'd like him to call you. I'll also, I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General. Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. The former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in Ukraine were bad news. So I just wanted to let you know that. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Now then, Zelensky says, truncating again, that since we have won the absolute majority in person, my candidate who will be approved by the parliament and will start as the new prosecutor in September, he or she will look into the situation, specifically to the company. And my guess is he's talking about Burisma, in that particular incident, mentioned in this issue. The issue of the investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore the honesty, so we will take care of that and we'll work on the investigation of the case. On top of that, I'd kindly ask you if you have any additional information that you can provide us. It would be very helpful for the investigation to make sure that we administer justice in our country with regard to the ambassador to the United States from Ukraine. As far as I can recall, her name was Ivanovich. Now that lady didn't deserve President Trump commenting that she was going to go through some things, and I quote him, "I'll have Mr. Giuliani give you a call. And I'm also going to have Attorney General Barr call, and we'll get to the bottom of it. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I heard the prosecutor was treated badly. Now, everybody in the European Union, friends of mine, knew that Poroshenko was a crook, and there's nobody in this room that does not know that, and Trump very well knew that, or should have, or had poor staffing during that period of time. I'm going to end here where he says, "Good. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate that. I'll tell Rudy and Attorney General Barr to call." And I just can't believe that Perry, Sunderland, and Rudy Giuliani, or whoever the three amigos were running around in Ukraine in some fashion, aside from the diplomatic responsibilities that we have with any country. And yes, Mr. Collins, we do have an FBI. We do have people that do investigations in foreign countries when there are commissions of crimes, and we don't use people running around. Otherwise, they could have used me. I was on the Intel Committee, and people could have asked me. I went to Ukraine. I did, after the Orange Revolution, the monitoring that led to them being able to stand up their government. And thanks to the Lithuanians and the Polish, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski at that time, that we were able to do that. And then I went back a second time to Ukraine to monitor their election. So I'm no rookie in this stuff. But when it comes to policy, what we have here is a corrupt president that wanted to do something to advance his political circumstances. And as the chairman said, that is so wrong. What say you, Mr. Rash?
Well, first of all, I'm moved by your statements and also by your work for democracy and for freedom and anti-corruption in Europe. And I know that that's something that has been very important to you. The president essentially empowered and outsourced an alternative channel to the regular Department of State and National Security Council officials. And Rudy Giuliani, as you say, was a part of it. We have lots of testimony from witnesses who said whenever the president got some kind of report on Ukraine, he'd say, "Talk to Rudy, talk to Rudy." In other words, Rudy's got the franchise on Ukraine. And we know what Rudy wanted to do is recently said we had an update on it. Rudy now puts himself front and center in the campaign to smear.
On Fox News this morning.
He put himself front and center in the campaign to smear our ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, who was fighting corruption, who is one of the world's leading anti-corruption fighters. And she understood that Ukraine had a chance here with the election of President Zelensky. And instead of bolstering Ukraine, helping them, getting the aid that we vote for them, aid that had been approved by the Department of Defense, having cleared all of the anti-corruption criteria that we had legislated, and the Department of State, which had done that. All the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, the money's set to go. The president holds it up, and then he puts this other team into action to engineer the shakedown against President Zelensky in order to get the political favor or the domestic political errand, as Dr. Fiona said, that he wanted.
It is, in my judgment, a shame of what happened. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I can't believe that they won't address the facts as you have just outlined them and as I have attempted to and as the chairman has. All they want to talk about is process. This ain't about process. This is about the president abusing his power. And you all will pardon me for not using my inside voice, but y'all don't either. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I'm happy to yield now to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rarely find myself in disagreement with my good friend from Florida. In fact, more often than not, I find myself educated by him. But I've got to disagree with him today because this is all about process. It's all about process. I don't know how many minds were changed when the gentleman from Florida read the transcript again. I suspect none. Probably the most most read transcript in American history. Folks know what they think that they know. But to my friend from Florida's point, is there a verbatim transcript somewhere? I don't know. You asked the question to the two witnesses that we had called to testify, two of the brightest members of Congress in my estimation. They don't know. And if I understood my friend from Georgia correctly, there were no witnesses who are working on that transcript that you had an opportunity to talk to directly?
No, we had no witnesses in judiciary.
So my friend from Florida is rightly outraged by his perception of wrongdoing. I hope that he's equally outraged by the inability to get information, not just our inability sitting here on the Rules Committee today, but your inability. If we had an Intelligence Committee member here, they could have answered Mr. Hastings' question. And I don't know. Well, I asked my friends, as Mr. Hastings did, is there somebody in this room, on this committee, that believes that the American people and our support of the Constitution that we've all sworn to uphold is threatened by having a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction be here to share with us? How are the American people advantaged by the absence of by the inability of our witnesses to answer Mr. Hastings' questions? How is America advantaged by that? My friend from Georgia, leading the Judiciary Committee, said that he was told, and I hope I'm misquoting you, Mr. Collins, and I've misquoted you before, so I won't take any offense with your correcting me. I believe you said you asked the chairman about having a minority witness day, and he dismissed it as dilatory.
That was part of including in the long letter that he read to us, yeah, that it was basically a dilatory tax, very similar to the letter that was given to Mr. Cole in answer.
I have the letter that was sent to Mr. Cole, and if we needed a finer chairman on the Democratic side of the aisle, then we might have some other choice on our side, but there is no finer chairman on the Democratic side of the aisle than my chairman on the Rules Committee and the staff that he has to support him. But I don't know if you've seen the letter. I'll share with you what it says, Mr. Collins. It says that not to worry. In this case, however, it says, Chairman Nadler has appropriately said that he will work with the minority to schedule their hearing.
Well, the gentleman,
I'd be happy to.
you know, and maybe he wasn't here when I referenced Mr. Neville's response before, but I'm quoting right here, where he says, "I'm willing to work with the minority to schedule such a hearing." All right? I mean,
Oh, my friend from Massachusetts misconstrues my statement. I stipulate that what you're saying is absolutely true. Absolutely true. I was only going to ask my friend from Georgia what good it was going to do to hold the minority hearing 2 days or 3 days or 3 weeks after we voted to impeach the President of the United States.
What message does it matter if you throw the person in jail and then say, oh, the Innocence Project will come out at some point and clear him? That's not what's happened here. You can't just say, oh, let's say, if Chairman Nadler came to me and said, you know, April 1st next year looks like a great day for your minority day hearing. What good does that do? Right. It does none. And again, it goes to the basic fairness. And I do want to say one thing, if you'll allow me, Mr. Woodall. Two things come. One, there's no witness, period. No witness in the statement that said that there was, number one, another transcript, or number two, the transcript we have was not accurate. Okay, that's just a fact. The other thing is here is I have talked about process a lot, will continue to, but I have also acknowledged, and I have very much of a factual defense of what I believe the facts are wrong here. You may disagree with my interpretation of the fact, but I have made a factual defense. I'll go back to it. We talked about the 4 things that we talked about. It didn't change, the pressure, but there's also 5 meetings. 5 meetings. If you want to draw a correlation between the conditioned aid, and it should have come on these 5 meetings. On July 25th, we have the transcript of the call between the President and President Zelensky. On July 26th, Special Envoy Volker and Taylor met with President Zelensky. The alleged Lincoln aid investigations never came up. August 27th, John Bolton met President Zelensky. Lincoln aid never came up. September 1st, Vice President Pence met with Zelensky in Warsaw. Lincoln aid investigations never came up. On September 5th, Senators Johnson and Murphy met with Zelensky again. The supposed Lincoln aid never came up. I point out the last two because they're important, because the last two were after it became public knowledge through Politico that the aid was being held. Nothing came up. Facts matter. And you don't have the right facts, then you have to go to the more amorphous topics. That's something I have fought on the facts. We may disagree about them, but I have fought back on facts.
Mr. Reskin appropriately points out that what we're doing is precedent setting. Hopefully, it's not unprecedented, but it is certainly precedent setting. And I think he asked us to think of the right question. And his question was, if this were a Democratic president, would your answer still be the same? I care less about the Republican president, Democratic president. I know Mr. Raskin has a love of the law. My question, Mr. Raskin, is how are the American people advantaged by Mr. Collins having no opportunity to put together a list of fact witnesses of his choosing, have them share their story, and then the very able majority on the Judiciary Committee, the Democrats, cross-examine those witnesses? How are the American people advantaged by that absence?
The first thing I need to say again is that the president and his team had the power to call whatever witnesses they wanted.
Well, if I could reclaim my time for a moment, you said that several times.
Yeah.
The first time you said it, you properly caveated it with any of the 17 witnesses that the Democrats called on the Intelligence Committee. The president could have called any one of those Democratic witnesses back to testify again. I don't believe you mean the president has the right to call any witness that he wants in front of the Judiciary Committee. For Pete's sake, you wouldn't even give the ranking member the right to call people in front of the Judiciary Committee.
He certainly did not have the right to call irrelevant witnesses, and so ultimately it would have been up to the chair to decide whether the person was relevant or not.
So to be clear, there is the ability, because I'm misunderstanding, the president had the ability to call witness into the Judiciary Committee other than the 17 witnesses that the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee decided they were going to deposition?
He could have submitted names for anybody he wanted.
Well, my ranking member submitted names, and the answer was no. No, we're not going to do that. But your definition of the fair and free process that advantages the American people is that the president could submit any name he wants to. The chairman just gets to say no.
But, my dear Mr. Woodall, you understand that we're in the process of collecting information to establish an indictment, in essence, charges against the president. These are articles of impeachment. The trial process takes place in the Senate. That's where they conduct a trial, where their rules will govern, and anybody presumably will be able to bring in whatever witnesses they want to bring in. Now, we have tried to run a completely open, fair, and transparent process.
Well,
here.
reclaim my time for a moment, because you have frequently, and you did when we established the rules for the impeachment process in this committee, you have frequently referred to grand jury room. The grand jury room is not intended to be a place of fairness. It's intended to be a place of indictment. You have said, happy to yield to my friend from
My
Florida,
goodness gracious, what did you just say?
that grand jury room is not intended to provide fairness to any defendant. It is intended to indict. As my friend from Maryland simply stated, the defense comes next.
Understood. But are you saying the prosecutors don't have any other responsibility in the grand jury other than to indict?
Of course not.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Of course not.
Mr. Woodall.
The prosecutor has an obligation to the people that the prosecutor serves in the same way that we have that same obligation. And the words, I want to quote him correctly, Mr. Raskin said there's been plenty of fairness in this process. And my question was, how are the American people advantaged? Mr. Collins getting absolutely no witnesses before the committee, and the White House getting absolutely no witnesses in front of the committee. And the answer is, Mr. Woodall, this wasn't intended to be a defense of the president.
If you heard me to say that, I clearly didn't make myself clear. The president and Mr. Collins and the Republicans could have called any of the witnesses who appeared, any of the 17 sworn witnesses. It's not yours or mine. These are American citizens. These are the Department of State personnel. These are National Security Council employees.
Reclaiming my time.
Let me just say, we speak over one another because the stenographer can barely keep up with us because we all talk so fast. So if we're talking over each other, so just, I caution everybody, the witnesses and members of the committee, just to ask a question, let the answer, and
I'm hamstrung, Mr. Chairman, by the fact that Mr. Raskin isn't the decision maker on these issues. Again, to Mr. Collins' point about the clock being the master, Mr. Nadler, Chairman Nadler, has put in months of work on this, not as much time as Chairman Schiff has put in on this, but put in months of work, and we have neither of the two committee chairmen who have done all of the work here before us to answer our questions. And I have no doubt that Mr. Raskin is exasperated because he is an answerer, and he is a fact provider, and he educates this committee on a regular basis on matters of the law. But defends my sense of fairness that my ranking member can't have a witness of his choosing. I'm not talking about 100 witnesses. I'm talking about a witness of his choosing to come, and that the process gets described over and over again as the White House had plenty of opportunity and everybody had an equal chance to question. Nonsense. Nonsense. And to let that record stand perpetuates the myth that this is supposed to have been a fair process. I would argue it could have been a fair process. It simply wasn't, Mr. Collins.
Just to be clear, and I think the operative word that my friend from Maryland said was tried. And I think I'll give a try. It just wasn't a real good one, to be fair in this. For me, and again, you can't have it both ways. You can't call it a grand jury in which only prosecution calls witnesses. There's no exculpatory. They have to depend on the prosecutor to look to prosecute your integrity and all that kind of stuff. You can't have it and say we're a grand jury, and then on the other side say we want to make it fair so that people can call witnesses and give their side of their defense. They don't call that side of the defense a grand jury. They don't do that. So here's the issue. If I've never been in a court or when I was practicing, I never went to the prosecutor to say, who could I call? And the prosecutor said, well, you can call all of my witnesses. Well, at least at some point in that mix, Mr. Raskin, I believe, would at least, and others, even on the Democrat side, I believe at least they would have to acknowledge that having the chairman determine relevancy of my witnesses call, or even the White House, is a problematic exercise, because if they're determining relevancy, then they're discounting any possibility of exculpatory evidence coming from one of my witnesses. They're basically saying they're irrelevant, so we don't want to hear from them, and discounting any possibility, that they would be exculpatory. So let's make that very clear in this. That's why this was, again, we fell from a very unfair process.
Now, Mr. Raskin, you said earlier, and I think rightly, you said some folks can't concede that the call was not perfect. Surely folks could concede that things were not perfect, and Mr. Collins did not characterize the call as perfect. My question is, can't you concede what Mr. Collins
I haven't heard anybody say that. Who said that?
Mr. Collins said he wasn't trying to describe it as perfect. He was trying to describe it as non-criminal. Right? I'm misquoting his statement. But my question to you is, can you not concede that having the chairman who is leading the impeachment inquiry determine relevancy of the, for lack of a better word, defense witnesses is flawed?
Yeah. So this was the exact same process that took place in the Clinton impeachment. It was the same process that took place in the Nixon impeachment, which is the minority gets the right to request witnesses, and if they're relevant, they will be accepted. It's hard to know what to do otherwise, especially in an environment where people are bringing in all kinds of extraneous conspiracy theories to try to explain what's going on.
Just to quote you back to you, because I want to use the best sources I can on this material. When you cited the House rule that required the minority witnesses be heard, you said, in your recollection, that's not a condition precedent to having the hearing and reporting the bill, and you are of course right.
You're talking about the minority hearing provision.
That's right.
About having an independent hearing for the minority.
There's absolutely no House rule that requires that we hear from the minority before not just the die has been cast, but the bill has been reported, passed on the floor, and sent to the president. That is not a requirement, and you are right that we should probably go back and look at that if we are truly trying to give the minority a voice. But you have to tell me how the American people are advantaged by hearing from exculpatory witnesses after after the House has voted.
Okay, first of all, if there is a name of an exculpatory witness, please put it forward. We've done nothing other than try to get all of the president's men to come and testify. It's the president who's been blockading Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Perry and the Director of the Office of Management Budget and numerous other witnesses. It's just, to me, it's the height of irony that you guys are making the argument that somehow we don't want the evidence in. We want all the evidence. That's why we want to hold the president in obstruction of justice, because he's been preventing us from getting all
It
the
would not surprise me if you were right. So let me ask the gentleman from Georgia, is that right? You submitted a list of witnesses that you wanted to come to the committee, and the president said that those witnesses would not be allowed to testify?
No, the president talked to me about that.
No, that's not right.
The interesting
No,
thing,
that's not right.
The interesting thing is I found out something new today. This is why hearings actually are good, and maybe you're recalling witness good. This is the first time I've ever heard, and Mr. Raskin said it twice today, that that if I'd have just called one of the 17, I'd have got them. That's been interesting. He said a couple of times now, if not more, that if I'd have just called one, now they're having to correct me. But he said it several times, and I understand this is tough, and he's in a very tough position, and he's doing an admirable job for what he's doing. But it is interesting that that would come out, because I know he is an integral part of that team, that if I'd have just called one of the 17, they would have been accepted, which would have been interesting. Wouldn't it have then been logical for the chairman to call some of those 17 so that we could have at least had the impression we were actually doing our own interviews of these witnesses? Because what happened even in the Intel committee is some of after you talked to them, they gave testimony, then they had to come back and some of them actually re-up their testimony. Why wouldn't we have brought them back, say, okay, you've done this a couple of times, but we didn't get that, and the majority whose job it was to prosecute this didn't do that as well.
Well, as you recall, we fought that on our side of the aisle when this process was being set up, thought it was odd that the Intelligence Committee was going to be the only one talking to fact finders, tried to require that exculpatory evidence be provided to the Judiciary Committee. I want to touch on one more piece of process, because my friend from Florida raised it. And he raised it in the context of Mr. McConnell and Mr. Graham, Senator McConnell and Senator Graham, and that they should recuse themselves because they've already picked a dog in this particular fight. I think we so often say things to one another around here that the American people end up listening to that turned out to be flawed. And again, I think everybody on this committee has great respect for Mr. Raskin. He's not just a valuable member of the Judiciary Committee. He's been more valuable member of our Rules Committee. But because I didn't have a chance, when I found out I wasn't going to have a chance to talk to Mr. Nadler, I went and brushed up on Raskin policy, and I think they misquoted you, to be fair, Mr. Raskin, but Salon did an interview with you even before the president was elected, and their headline is at least one Democratic congressman is already preparing to impeach Donald Trump. The article is Donald Trump won't be sworn in for another 48 hours, and at least one Democratic congressman has already seen enough. And you go on to talk about the emoluments clause and your I think, legitimate questions as a constitutionalist about those issues. That was 48 hours before the president was sworn in. You're sitting on the grand jury that is impartially considering the evidence. And the emoluments clause that you were quoted as supporting impeachment on behalf of 48 hours before the president was even elected, I can't find anywhere in the articles that we see before us today. Have you changed your mind from then? Or do you think, as Politico is reporting, that we're going to see part 2 of impeachment come down the road, that this was just impeachment number 1, and there's going to be impeachment number 2 and impeachment number 3?
Thank you very much for that question. And I would love nothing more than to have a separate hearing on my personal views about the meaning of the foreign emoluments clause and the domestic emoluments clause. I've written widely about it, including in the Washington Post. I've written several pieces about it. But I'm here to represent the Judiciary Committee because of the absence of Mr. Nadler. And it wouldn't be fair for me to get into that because I would not be representing the view of the entire Judiciary Committee.
I think that's perfectly fair. When we voted to table, as Mr. Cole referenced in regard to Mr. McGovern's vote in December of 17, of course you opposed that motion to table as well. And at that time, you said it was a vote out of frustration, and that what you wanted was a real inquiry into corruption and criminality in the Trump administration. Now, this was 2 years before this phone call ever happened. And so, again, I'm looking at articles of impeachment here. I've got members of the Judiciary Committee who were certain of corruption and criminality in the Trump administration that exists nowhere here. And
Well, Mr. Woodall, I mean,
Please.
you would concede that there are other episodes of corruption in the business career of Donald Trump and in the political career now that are not at all part of this process. And so, I mean, I don't know if, look, there are patterns of conduct behavior that have been noticed. One of them is extremely relevant to this investigation. That's what took place in 2016. That's when Donald Trump essentially invited in Russia, the whole world heard him say it, invited Russia to come into our election. He welcomed their interference. The special counsel of the Department of Justice found more than 100 contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian nationals there. And then when it began to happen, the president moved to obstruct the investigation. And that's in the Mueller report, which we talked about today, all of those episodes of corruption. So there is a pattern of evidence. And I don't know, look, when Bill Clinton got impeached for what he did, you could certainly find Republicans who'd been calling for his impeachment for several years for other stuff. There were conspiracy theories about him going on for years. That doesn't necessarily discredit what happened in the impeachment of Bill Clinton. You got to take it on its own terms. That's why we're trying to get back to the facts of what took place here with the Ukraine shakedown.
I think you're mistaking my intent. I was not citing comments that you'd made in the past to put you as a never Trumper whose sole purpose was to reverse a legitimate American election. That was not my intent. My intent was to mention you as someone who's a thoughtful legal mind who had other legal concerns going back for years. And when folks say, Rob, what do you mean this process is rushed? We've done it over just under 90 days. Isn't that long enough? Well, no, that's faster than any other process. That's faster than we got a response from the Justice Department when we asked for our Fast and Furious documents. But what it isn't is a complete process. I think by your own testimony here that there's more that we could have done that we didn't do. And my question then is, because I do think we're all about advantaging the American people and the Republic and the Constitution, are we advantaged? Are the American people advantaged? Because again, Politico is reporting that the investigations are going to continue, that the investigations do not stop with the House vote tomorrow. We will continue to investigate the potential impeachment of the president long after we have already voted to impeach the president, is the story that is out there today. Are we advantaged as an institution to have impeachment number 1 and impeachment number 2 and impeachment number 3 instead of, as we did in the Bill Clinton era, put all of the articles into a single document after a longer and more thorough investigation and have this process sent to the Senate just once?
I believe, I'm going to ask my staff just to confirm, I believe the Clinton investigation moved much more quickly after the Starr report arrived in Congress than we have so far, but we'll check the dates on use. But I think they're approximately in the same ballpark. But look, your basic question is an excellent one. You ask an excellent question here. And all I can say is that we have a clear and present danger to our democracy right now because of the electoral corruption. This president invited in a foreign power to come and interfere in our election. And he used all of the resources of his office to coerce President Zelensky to come in to make these announcements he wanted for a totally political purpose. That's this election that's going on right now. And so we got to deal with this. And we have a very serious and complicated problem to address as a country right now, which is, do we want to establish that this can be the norm going forward? That any president, whether their last name is Trump or Obama or Woodall or anything else, can go to foreign governments in the middle of a campaign, lure them in, either through coercion or through honey, whatever it might be, and get them to participate in our election. That's a really serious problem. So, look, I agree with you. You ask a trenchant question, Mr. Woodall. There are other things that are not part of this, but that is because of the urgency of this situation.
I take that, I take that point, Mr. Collins.
I say it again, clock and calendar. That's why we're doing it. That's what it is. That's why we say things like it's an imperative, ongoing, whatever you want to call it. It's a clock and calendar issue. And look, we already know that when this fails, there'll probably be others. That has been reported widely, not just in magazine, straight out of the words of Mr. Schiff, straight out of the words of Mr. Green, other colleagues that we've had. And again, Press Turley said it this way: current lack of proof is another reason why an abbreviated investigation of this matter is so damaging to the case for impeachment. It doesn't have the footing on it, and you're doing it because you want to get into an election, when obviously the discussion was a previous one in which there were, issues that was looking at, then I can't help you, and time and calendar will take over.
Well, we're talking today about reversing America's last election. Candidly, I have every bit as much concern about the time that we will reverse the next election, or the election after that, or the election after that. To do this in a partisan way, of course, there are always going to be differences of opinion. I disagree with my chairman about much more than I agree with him about, but that doesn't mean that we can't find a process to move forward on together. It is not more divided in this Congress today than it was in 1998 when folks found a process that they could work on together, because as much as we cared about the presidency then, we cared more about the Constitution later. And we found a way to move forward. And moving forward in a partisan way is going to have repercussions. I know my friend from Maryland knows that. He believes it's urgent enough, it's worth the risk. But it is a measurable and substantial risk. And certainly the 13 of us, 14 with Mr. Collins here today, are going to be judged on that front, because despite our own personal interest in the facts, we are not a fact committee. We are a process committee, and I don't believe America is going to judge us harshly because of the way the facts come out. I think America's going to judge us harshly because of the process that has come forward. And with that, I yield back, Mr.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Let me just say, we keep on hearing a lot about the clock calendar, but I would remind everyone that we are here because of abuse and obstruction. The president's abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. That's why we're here. I said in my opening, and I'll say this again, we just have a difference of opinion. My friends try to characterize this as trying to overturn the last election. I look at this, as a crime in progress, and that we're trying to prevent the president from rigging the next election. And again, I've never, ever seen or witnessed a moment like this where a president of either party has publicly invited foreign intervention in our election. He did it when he was running for president. He did it with Ukraine, and the administration has purposely decided not to cooperate, drag their feet, hoping that we'll get to the next election. I mean, this is, I said it's wrong. I mean, it is beyond the pale. And we just have a difference of opinion on this. I yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for being here. I also want to thank my colleagues that have spoke before me today for using your indoor voice and for exercising the decorum. We are on the third floor of the U.S. Capitol, and I think it's important for us to be respectful with each other. Today, we regrettably face one of the most solemn duties the Constitution vests in Congress. I, like all of you here, did not come to Congress to impeach a president. As a matter of fact, on January 20th of 2017, I stood in the freezing rain to watch Donald Trump be sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. I was there in good faith. I was there because I believe in the peaceful transfer of power. I was there because I believe in the rule of law. And maybe foolishly, I also believe in second chances. that we would have elected someone who can stand up and represent all Americans. But then in September, approximately 3 months ago, we learned that President Trump had withheld critical military funding to Ukraine, a strategic partner in a war with Russia. And then, October 3rd, President Trump announced that China and Ukraine should investigate his political rivals on national TV. The president's personal attorney also said that Biden should be investigated. Now, President Trump famously said that he could shoot someone dead in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York City, and he would get away with it. What mindset do you have to be in to say that out loud on national TV and to believe that? Well, anyone who turns a blind eye to behavior like this is providing him that right. 5 GOP primaries have been canceled. Kansas, Alaska, South Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. GOP, the Republicans across the nation are locked in step to defend at any cost the bad actions and illegal actions of this president. The facts are clear. To quote the USA Today editorial board, Trump used your tax dollars to shake down a vulnerable foreign government to interfere in a US election for his personal benefit. Ambassador Gordon Sondland, President Trump's handpicked ambassador to the European Union, testified to President Trump's abuse of power under oath. And he said, I know that members of this committee have frequently framed these complicated issues in a form of a simple question. Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously with regard to the request to the requested White House call and White House meeting, the answer is yes. We also have the rough transcript of Trump's July 25th call, released by the president himself. For all the claims that President Trump was withholding military aid over corruption in Ukraine, he never once utters the word corruption in the call. He does ask for a favor, though, a favor that has nothing to do with U.S. national interest and everything to do with his own political interest. Trump's actions were clear abuse of presidential power. He conditioned official acts of office on a political advantage in the next election. Think about that. All of us here, members of Congress, have taken ethics training on the House rules and on federal crimes. I just did the training last week. We've all sworn the same oath of office to protect and defend our Constitution. And imagine if a city in our districts asked for our help with a grant or an appropriations request. Would any of us reply, I would like you to do us a favor, though, and announce an investigation into my political opponent? Of course not. And why would you not do that? Because no one is above the law, not even the president. And you know that asking for that type of favor is illegal. The rule of law is what gives our great country its strength. The rule of law is what separates us from third world countries where dictators reign for decades on. The rule of law is what makes us, our great country, the envy of the world, the place that other countries look for inspiration as they grow their own democracies. And it is the rule of law that brings all of us here today. And as the only member of Congress from Central America, take it from me, that we never want to see a day when the rule of law simply fades away. I never want to see a day where American families have to send their children to live outside of the country because of public corruption. Look at Honduras. Their constitution banned presidential re-elections. Their constitution clearly states that if presidents try to get rid of the re-election ban, that they should be removed from office immediately. And despite all of this, President Juan Orlando Hernandez ran again anyway, and the Supreme Court in Honduras, filled with his supporters, got rid of term limits, and he is now serving his second term in violation of his country's founding principles. Honduras is now a narco state, and we have thousands of Honduran families at our southern border seeking asylum. In Guatemala, the people have been waging an uphill battle against corruption for years. Former President Otto Perez Molina took bribes in exchange for low taxes. Millions of tax dollars lined the pockets of high-ranking officials instead of meeting the needs of the people in one of the poorest countries in Latin America. Today, President Trump said, after a meeting with President Morales, in Guatemala, they handle things much tougher than the US. Imagine that. CICIG, the anti-corruption organization formed to bring justice to Guatemala, brought hundreds of cases of corruption to light. But once they began investigating President Jim Morales for illegal campaign financing, he promptly shot down the commission. Does this sound familiar to anyone? President Morales even forced the former Attorney General, Thelma Aldana, who worked to fight corruption, to seek asylum in the United States because her safety is now at risk. Does this sound familiar to anyone? I bring these examples up to remind my colleagues that the future health of our democracy is not assured. We can slide back to tyranny, one corrupt act at a time. And until our democracy is like the fake village in North Korea that faces the DMZ, a nice-looking facade that masks the tyranny within. That's why the articles of impeachment are so important. Mr. Chairman, the Constitution did not come from a higher power. It is just a document, a piece of paper with words written on it. But we, the people, give the Constitution its power. We, the people, decide to follow and honor our laws. And today, we, the people, must agree that the laws apply to everyone, including the President of the United States. that that is the president that we expect of all elected officials. And it is the president that we must reaffirm in these proceedings. 60 years ago, Martin Luther King issued a warning during the civil rights era, which resonates very much with the choice before us today. And Dr. King said, if you fail to act now, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Let's move forward. I want to ask you, do you know how many witnesses were blocked from testifying?
I think I may have asked help on that. I believe that there are 9 administrators and witnesses who do not come forward. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there were 9 administration witnesses who were called who did not come forward. And if I might, Ms. Torres, I'm moved by what you had to say. I was not aware that there were GOP primaries being canceled. It allows us to refocus on the importance of elections and sovereignty of the people. I know some people would say, well, that's just a private affair, let them do their own thing, but forgive the law professor in me, but there's a whole line of cases, Smith versus Albright, Terry versus Adams, it's called the white primary line of authority, which says that party primaries are actually essential for the voting rights of all citizens, and equal protection does apply there. So,
But
I know
Republicans in 5 states are being denied an opportunity to choose a Republican candidate to move forward and represent them.
So
Five.
the general point there is that our system is based on the idea of popular self-government. So you need to have channels of effective political participation open so people can participate and people can compete. Competition is good in economics, it's good in sports, it's good in politics too. We want to have a play of ideas and a marketplace of ideas so we're able to get the best ideas out there. But the other critical point you made, and thank you for pointing us to the Central American, Latin American example, because there's been a lot of instability in democracy there where it's under attack by despots and dictators and corrupt forces, and we're seeing this all over the world now. What's taking place in America has got to be seen in a global context. There are dictators, despots, tyrants, kleptocrats, and Putin is one of the ringleaders, and Orban in Hungary, who's championing illiberal democracy, and Sisi in Egypt, and Duterte in the Philippines, and homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and on and on. And they're all besieging democracy. And who is the beacon of hope for the world in terms of democracy? America is. And we've got to show how it's really done.
I'm going to ask you one last question. Did witness intimidation occur during your committee hearing?
To be clear, there were 9 senior officials who refused congressional subpoenas.
On what grounds?
There were different statements made by different of them. Some of them said that it was because of an executive branch policy. And so I have to go back and look and see which ones invoked this or that doctrine, perhaps. I'm not sure. But we've never seen anything like this in scale, in scope, and degree in American history. We just have not. And the chairman of the Intelligence Committee and the chair of the Judiciary Committee have praised those people who've come forward. And if you would allow me just one thought about this, I think it's been said a couple of times, your witnesses. I think there were multiple witnesses there who totally recoiled and rebelled against the idea that they were anybody's witness. These are people who devoted their lives to the State Department, the National Security Council, serving the American people. We have people in there like Ambassador Taylor, a decorated Vietnam War hero. We have the lieutenant colonel who was injured in Iraq, is a Purple Heart winner. We have Fiona Hill. We have Ambassador Yovanovitch, whose family fled Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia and committed her whole career to American democracy as an example. These people are not majority witnesses or minority witnesses, or these are ours. The vast majority of them said, we're not here in any partisan context. We're not here with any partisan purpose. We're here to tell the truth. And they swore an oath to tell the truth. Those people went under oath. They are not throwing tomatoes from the sidelines. They went under oath and told exactly what they saw and what they heard, and we have their direct testimony.
And rather than commending them for their courage, someone on Twitter decided to intimidate and diminish their testimony.
You know, I never thought in my lifetime we would get to a point where the President of the United States heckles people for doing their civic duty of going under oath to tell truth.
Mr. Chairman,
Would my friend yield just a moment?
absolutely yield to you.
I was similarly shocked, as Mr. Raskin was, when I heard folks were canceling their primaries. So since South Carolina happens to be my neighbor, I went back and looked, and it turns out that's just something that they do. They did it for Reagan and Bush, and they did it for Clinton and Obama, that the party that's in power and has the White House, in the name of saving dollars, cancels it. And I share that with you because I was comforted when I heard that it was a historical practice as opposed to something that had just
And
arisen.
I appreciate,
you.
I appreciate your feedback on that. I'm going to yield back to.
Thank you very much. I think the committee is going to take a 5-minute break so you can stretch your legs and do whatever else you need to do. All right? Yeah, this is strict 5 minutes if we can. All right. Without objection, the committee stands.